New America would like to welcome you to our virtual event. The program will begin momentarily. While we are waiting, I want to review a few housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded, and a recording will be posted to the New America events page within 48 hours after the event. Attendees will be in listen-only mode, and you will not be able to be seen or heard by your fellow attendees or panelists. Therefore, we encourage you to share your comments and questions in the Q&A features, which can be found at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for joining us. We will begin momentarily.
Hi, everyone. Very good morning from the US and a good evening to all my friends in India and Pakistan, and welcome to this Davos dialogue on digital equity in India, Pakistan, and beyond, which is brought to you by Future Tense, which is a collaboration of New America, Slate Magazine, and the Arizona State University that explores impact of technology, emerging technologies on society, and by the Global Shaper Community Bangalore, which is a youth-led community addressing civic and social issues related to sustainable fashion, conscious consumerism, mental health, and of course, bridging the digital divide. My name is Rashi Saxena, and I am your moderator for today. We have a fabulous panel discussion. A little bit about me. I'm a social innovation practitioner and project-based consultant out of Bangalore. I serve as the global project coordinator for Hate Speech that works with governments, academia, researchers to monitor hate speech online. We also analyze the correlation between online hate speech that can result in offline violence. But just to give you a disclaimer, we're not going to talk about hate speech online, although yes, the topic is directly related to it. I'm going to talk about this conversation is also live streamed on Slate's YouTube channel. So you can also feel free to watch it there. You can also follow the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag digital equity by following Future Tense on Twitter. So now that we've begun, I'd also encourage everyone who's joined in to introduce yourselves on the chat and tell us where you are logging in from and what you expect to take away from this dialogue. To start us off, I'll talk a little briefly about Davos Labs and how it came to be. The Davos Labs is a global shaper community. It's perhaps the first and the largest youth-driven recovery plan, 10-week recovery plan to address the world's converging crises after the year we've had so far. We've identified 10 pillars. Some of them are mental health, inclusive jobs, public health, conscious consumerism. This particular dialogue falls into the category of digital literacy and digital access. We're basically looking to inspire, mobilize, and empower young people to shape the unprecedented grassroots global responses needed to address during the coronavirus pandemic. And some of the ways that we did do it, we launched it on World Youth Day in the form of surveys and dialogues. So if you do want your voice to be heard, all of these responses would be aggregated, and these also would be culminated into a youth recovery plan and a report in the form of a report which would be presented. So just wanted to check the chat a bit and see if you all are introducing yourselves. So yeah, I'm also going to now move on to introducing our lovely panelists. We have joining in from India, we have Amrita Chaudhary, who is the director of CCAOI and representing the interests of the internet users and has been working in this space for over more than 15 years. Amrita is also the president of the Internet Society Delhi chapter. She's also United International Governance Forum MAG member. She's the vice chair of the Asia Pacific Regional IGF. She heads the Women's Special Internet Group of Internet Society and is also the nominating committee 2021 member at ICANN. She's one of the founding members of the India School of Internet Governance, for which I was also a fellow for in 2019, and curates regularly for the Geneva Internet Platform and advises and guides the Youth IGF, which is a youth initiative in India and rural communities at the Internet Society. So very warm welcome to Amrita. We have Faraz Salim from Pakistan, who is a business professional with 22 years of experience in business consulting in emerging markets. He's worked with a number of multinational conglomerates in strategy, execution, marketing and communication, and business technology implementation. He successfully set up and operated a boutique business consulting and research firm, Edisa Consulting, and he's currently serving as the general manager at the Wood Hercules Group. And he's also known for his passion and driving change and initiating projects and strategies that are looking at implementing from a technological level, management changeovers, and also bringing about corporate branding executions. We have Sarah Morris, who's the director of New America's Open Technology Institute, where she leads OTI strategic planning, fundraising, and management. Prior to her role as director, she's also led the program's efforts on a broad portfolio of issues, which include broadband access and adoption, something that we're going to talk about a lot here, online consumer protection, and preserving the open internet. She's also a regular contributor to The Hill and frequently writes for a variety of other national outlets. Prior to joining New America, Morris was also a fellow with the public interest firm Media Access Project, where she assisted with research and drafting of FCC comments on a wide range of key communication issues. And with that, we're going to start with the opening remarks from our panelists. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Rashi, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm thrilled to be on this panel with such an esteemed set of panelists. I'm already excited for the discussion based on just the conversations we had in the lead up to this session. I'm Sarah Morris. I run the Open Technology Institute, which is a program within the broader New America umbrella. OTI focuses on research and analysis and advocacy on a variety of tech policy topics. Our aim is to ensure that all communities have equitable access to technology and that they're able to benefit from that technology rather than be harmed by it. Our issues span many of the issues that Rashi mentioned in her intro of me, everything from broadband access and adoption to government surveillance to encryption, data privacy, content moderation, and AI decision-making, algorithmic decision-making, and net neutrality and other consumer protection issues online. So I'm thrilled. Broadband access and adoption is an issue I've worked on throughout my entire 10-year tenure at OTI. And I'm, as we'll discuss, I'm excited for the opportunity to think about this at a time when there's so much attention to the issue. There's numerous ways that you can approach the question of digital equity, even just thinking about this from a United States perspective, to help sort of ground our conversation a bit. I'll start by providing an overview of some findings from our research project that we've completed over various years, but the most recent iteration we released last summer. It's called The Cost of Connectivity. And it's research that compares internet access on data on 760 internet plans across 28 cities in the United States and around the world. One goal of the project was to see how the United States compared in terms of cost and speeds to other countries and cities, but also to provide a snapshot of connectivity in the United States. Over 450 plans, I believe, were US based plans. And part of that, as we'll talk about later, is to fill in a gap of data that we're missing from the federal government about pricing information. And our findings were really, really telling. Our top finding was basically just that we find substantial evidence of an affordability crisis in the United States. Internet access is simply too expensive. We're number one for highest average monthly price when compared to cities in Europe and Asia. The average price for internet service in the United States is according to our research, is $68.38. This is simply unaffordable for millions of people who either lack access or have access that is not sufficient to do the myriad things that are required in this digitally dependent society. And the other thing I'll note about cost in the United States, which differs at least to degree, if not in concept more generally to other cities, is that that price of $68.38 a month is an incomplete picture. Modem fees can add up to 75% to a monthly bill, or 75% on average to a monthly bill in the United States, compared to just a 30% addition abroad. In addition, many US plans use promotional rates, and that $68.38 average price is based on the promotional, the immediately advertised price. And so when that promotional rate expires, the price per service per month will increase on average by $22.25 a month, which is pretty dramatic. But finally, we see one bright spot in the research, and that's that municipal networks offer some of the best value in the United States. And we'll dig into this a little bit more when we think about solutions and the way that the models that we use to try to solve the connectivity and affordability crisis. But there were sort of three buckets of, beyond those takeaways, three primary areas of focus when we think about where we go from here or how we define the problem. And it's affordability, transparency, and competition. I've already talked about the affordability component, but also there's this dramatic transparency problem. Internet users in the United States and often in other locations as well simply don't have a good understanding of how much internet service actually costs. So it's very difficult to make an informed decision when it comes to subscribing to various plans. And so we've advocated for a broadband nutrition label that essentially provides all of the relevant information about quality of service, cost, including any policies around overage fees, any data caps, et cetera, as an internet user facing tool to assess the actual thing that's being offered in the market. And we've also urged the FCC to collect better data on pricing so that organizations like the Open Technology Institute don't have to bear that full burden of doing the research. So that's affordability, transparency, and competition. As I mentioned, community networks, municipal networks can provide incredible competitive benefits in areas where they operate, serving to drive down costs and improve services where there are insufficient competition and connectivity already. And so we'll talk about those potential solutions and how they play out in the context of a policy as we go through the conversation. But for now, I will stop there.
Thanks, Sarah. And now I'll move to Faraz. And Faraz is going to cover one of the most important core elements of digital access, which is infrastructure. Over to you, Faraz.
Great, thank you, Rashi and Sarah. That was a great explanation or detail about what you do. So definitely not as exciting as what you're doing, but I come here representing a group of dreamers and doers, and today I bring a dream. But before I share the dream, let me just set the stage a little bit. And coming from Pakistan, a country in South Asia, where there's an opportunity to connect the next billion internet users. Let me set some statistics about Pakistan itself. There's 84.2% of tele-density, and 3G and 4G penetration is at about 44%. Broadband stands at 45%. And now, being a part of an organization of dreamers and doers, we end up thinking systems, and we end up wanting to design for humans. So, and somewhere the math doesn't add up because some component needs a little more attention. And why do we say that? Because in a country where there are 220 million people, there's only 1 million freelancers that are registered, and there are about 500,000 SMEs and individuals that are part of the digital economy. So, and so I'm going to repeat that this region has the opportunity to connect the next billion people. And it is vastly different from the unconnected population of the world. The average is about 40% of the earth is not connected to a data network. So if we were to talk about digital exclusion or inclusion, so to speak, it happens by giving access to infrastructure, data connectivity, and personal technology. And there's no secret that for developing countries, mobile broadband is directly proportional to high macro and microeconomic benefits. So, since cities in most developing countries enjoy a decent connection, I bring a dream for the rural population. And the dream is, imagine there's a remote village up in the hills that has barely 2,000 people. And imagine how it would be if they were on the network, had access to data, had power to electrify a small school, had enough ability to not only connect to the network, but buy and sell, connect with other people, buy and sell, and also learn and teach. And this dream is, I think, what of recent has started really resonating with me. So, and the group that I belong to started their journey in this in their humble effort to set up a tower sharing business. A tower sharing business where you have in areas where it doesn't make sense for one mobile network operator to set up a tower and then make it feasible for them. This entity within our group sets up towers and puts up antenna for multiple mobile network operators. And it suddenly starts making financial sense for not only us, but of course for the mobile network operator. But the beneficiary of that commercial thought process is the person who has not been on the network so far. So, and our spirit has been very simple. We make things first available, then affordable, and then sustainable. So with that, I can say for sure that we wouldn't have been able to do this without partners. And partnerships are what are going to make this happen. So, the Professor Strauss's stakeholder capitalism says design for all of your stakeholders, not just your shareholders. And it's not just about return. It's about return to society. It's about return to shareholders. It's about return to employees. It's a plethora of people. So, and interestingly, a little while ago in an event I was attending, Tech Mahindra's Chandra Prakash Gurani also mentioned that public-private partnership is what is going to make all of these things happen. But I'm here to just leave this for everybody to look it up. There's something called the Edison Alliance, and it intends to prove that partnerships are what are going to connect the next billion people. And I think there's a great model out there through the Sustainable Markets Initiative, and there's a charter in there called Terra Carta. And they propose that public, private, and philanthropic partnerships are what are going to solve the most pressing problems of our time. So with that, I yield the floor. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I hope my dream has been conveyed, our dream actually. So thank you.
Thanks for that discussion. We now move on to Amrita, but before that, I also wanted to tell the audience that you are allowed to ask any questions, and please feel we will address them a little bit towards the end. So if you have any questions, and also feel free to share any resources that you think are interesting, and we'd love to see the chat being as animated and as the discussion is at the moment. So now we move on. Amrita is going to talk a little bit about her journey in the policy space, right from starting with cyber cafes to what the landscape is now. Over to you, Amrita.
Thank you, Rashi. Am I audible? Because I was having some connectivity issue. Is it okay?
It's okay.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll bring in the Indian perspective and what we at CCAY have been doing. If you look at India, we are very interestingly placed. We are the second largest we have the second largest internet user population, which is around 767 million broadband users as per the regulators' December end report, the January end report. However, we have more than 60% people yet to be connected online. We have a huge digital divide. And if we look at what the pandemic has brought in is our reliance on internet, be it for shopping, health, education, getting the basic government services, etc. Everything has gone online. However, the pandemic has also highlighted that the people who have internet, the way they have benefited, and the people who have not. People have been pushed further back. A study by Oxfam says that 80% of the students have not been able to attend their classes because of lack of internet during the pandemic, and many of them may not be able to come back to schools. So that is the stark reality we have. And obviously we have a huge gender divide. While the government is having a lot of regulatory mechanisms, policies to do it, telecom players are also working. And interestingly, India has the lowest telecom rates, even the internet rates, but still in some places it is expensive. It is not, the accessibility is an issue. Simultaneously, how people will use, what they would be using, the demand part is also a challenge. And again, with that is mindsets, as in, we have a patriarchal society. So many places, women having a mobile or an internet is something like the family is losing control. In certain societies, that's what we have seen. So these are certain challenges we have. And there are opportunities. There are women who have used the internet and, they have actually benefited. Their entire families have benefited. We are recently doing a study for for AI, where we are looking at the cost of exclusion, and we have had some wonderful stories of how women have actually benefited, even from the remote areas. So we at CCAY, we do a lot of work. We are involved in the access issue. We are always a proponent that access should be provided to people, be it shared access, because not everyone are digitally literate. They may not have the necessary infrastructure or skills. So shared access through public kiosks, cyber cafes, etc., is something we advocated 12 years back. We also believe in having internet in the local languages. With the National Internet Exchange of India, we've trained about 2.5 million people on 0.25 million people on digital literacy in local 6 languages. We've been doing a lot of research on the, various aspects to build capacity at different levels. We have a monthly digital newsletter which we come up to share information about the various issues which are going. We had stakeholder discussion, involved people to come and discuss on the public policies which are being discussed, be it privacy, be it security, be it data protection, because even if you are using the internet, these things are important. We are doing some work on training senior citizens on safe literacy, because they have the pandemic has pushed them into the internet, but they really don't know how to protect themselves, as well as look at fake news, misinformation, etc. So we're doing a lot of work. But what I have seen in my 15 years of experience in this sphere is it is not something which one stakeholder can do themselves. If we want internet to be the same for everyone, we need to empower people, and all stakeholders, be it government, business, civil society, have to work together, and only then can we achieve some level of what we are aiming at, the universal access. So Rashi, that's my initial comments. I'm happy to comment on any of your questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Amrita. Yeah, just some food for thought for the audience. We have a few questions for you on Mentimeter. So we have around 3 to 4 questions, and we wanted you to answer it I'm going to share it on the screen at the moment. So you need to go to menti.com, and use the code 66288272. The first question is, what do you think the term digital rights means? And you have 1 minute. The 39 attendees have 1 minute to answer that. Also, maybe I could be a little clearer. So we're trying to understand, what do you think about the term digital rights, and do you think it should be equated with human rights? Because we've seen most of our essential services, especially during the pandemic, that require the use of digital services. And perhaps my friends and my neighbors in India and Pakistan would agree that we used to talk about roti, kapra and makan, but now it's roti, kapra, makan, and data. So how essential has it been for you? So yeah, that's okay. So we see knowing your legal rights, human right, propriety, access. Does anyone think that digital rights or the internet should also be seen as a public service? Perhaps. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. So who do you think should be responsible for educating citizens about their digital rights? Is it government? Is it tech companies? Is it the citizens themselves? Feel free to answer that. Yeah, and Umar says that we have a Charter of Human Rights and Principles of the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition. And Umar, please feel free to share those resources on chat. Mixture of people, educators. Okay, we do have a combination of all of them. A lot of people say government, a lot of people say tech companies. Nobody's saying citizens themselves. So are we trying to derive the fact that citizens can't take matters in their own hands? Okay, we do basic human right. Okay, we move on to the next question, which will be really interesting. So what are the initiatives that you've come across in your region that promote digital access and inclusion? You could mention the links on the chat and responses. And maybe if the panelists want to also chime in, but then yeah, we're gonna talk about this in detail, and we're trying to understand what our audience feels about these questions. Internet Sati. Rethinking Aadhaar, Lifeline. I work in tech, so understand. One laptop per child. That's something that is also echoed by the Affordable Alliance that Amrita was talking about. Triple helix joined. Education, free of traffic, non-profit. Community networks, digital literacy from YouTube, NGOs. Let's get some more responses for this. Okay, do we move on to the next question? What are the main obstacles and barriers faced by women and girls to access digital technologies and participate in digital life? Cost, okay. Social norms, okay. Privacy violations, that's a good one. Lack of literacy is also a good one. Most of the devices aren't necessarily designed for keeping women and girls in mind. Also see educational opportunities. Harassment issues, yes, a lot of them aren't confident enough, and they also aren't comfortable loaning devices for the work that they want to do or for studying. Okay, patriarchy wins, yeah, is the top answer. Can we move on to the next question? And this is our final question. What are some possible solutions for enhanced digital inclusion for women and girls? I think by litigation, you mean stronger litigation, stronger advocacy, better laws. I can say, at least from India, it's better implementation of the laws. Privacy rights, stronger online regulation, advocacy. Federal investments. Welcoming safe space. Okay, all right. Are we going to move on? Just another reminder for the audience that please feel free to post your questions. We would be taking them once this discussion is in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So now I'd like to jump back on with the panelists and maybe can start for us. You were talking about how private entities and governments need to come together to solve this, and might also seem as a very ambitious plan because you'll have different targets, you'll have different motivations. How do you see that? How do you see that coming together, and what are the examples, if you have any, of successful private and public partnerships that could help us bridge this digital divide?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Rashi. There are many examples of public-private partnership being successful. But the proposal over here is a little different. What I'm suggesting is that private sector brings its agility and the ability to do things while public sector brings its blanket approach to populations once they define what is required or best for their populace. And philanthropy actually bridges a gap that is a need unmet. So, and in order to reframe the problem statement, we all need to come together and figure out what exactly is it that we're trying to do. I mean, the proverb is you know, don't give a man some fish, teach them how to fish. So in order for us to come together, we need to be able to create a system through which value creation happens. And philanthropy would be an important partner to bring into the public-private equation. So how does that happen? And I'm going to quickly explain this. For example, if an area for connectivity doesn't make sense for the private sector, and the public and government doesn't have an arm for investment, then philanthropy can always bridge the gap, because the arbitrage for quality of life improving is you can't measure that. So thank you.
Thanks, Faraz. So we also have a question, Amrita, where how do you think governments in India, the state governments or the central governments, are enabling environments that allow us to achieve digital access? Are there any programs? Are there any schemes? We've also seen that during the pandemic, we've also been heavily reliant on e-commerce. We've also seen a rise in digital payments. How have you? What are your thoughts on that?
Is my audio better now, Rashi, than earlier?
It's a lot better. It's a lot better.
Okay. Right.
And maybe
thanks. So
if it goes weaker, you could also switch off your camera so that we could hear you. But it's absolutely
okay. Okay. There are various initiatives of the government in India to connect people, because the government has a plan to connect all Indians. For example, one would be building the infrastructure, like the fiber optic network, to take it to about 0.25 million villages, which we call as gram panchayats. Similarly, this is done in public-private partnership using the Universal Access UASG funds. Then there is also something called the Common Service Centers in the rural areas, managed by young entrepreneurs, to provide the digital, because not everyone has devices or are digitally literate. Similarly, we have just recently, the government has announced something called the PM Vani, which is to actually provide private Wi-Fi or public Wi-Fi networks across the country. So there are similarly various initiatives. There are digital literacy courses, etc., which the government has initiated, which is good, but there is more to be done. And it is, as I mentioned earlier, it is just not the government who has to do so. During the pandemic, we definitely saw the rise of use of, the online medium for everything. Even a shopkeeper for today, or even a vegetable seller, is now using WhatsApp or using payment modes, mobile payment mode, because that is helping their businesses, economic strata understand the benefit they get by using the digital medium. They start using it. It's not only affordability, access. It is affordable in India, but when a person sees value in using that in their lives, in earning their living, they will definitely say.
Thanks, Amrita. No, but you actually brought a pretty important point there when you said that digital inclusion, especially if you're looking at skilling and scalability, the government does have a much larger bandwidth for that. But digital literacy right now, given how the internet has penetrated into our lives and it affects us from a social level, and it can also hamper us economically. It can't be just a one-off course, right? It has to be something more holistic, something more consistent. And maybe, Sarah, if you could also point in as to what are the efforts that you all have made, what are the policy recommendations you all have come in, and does net neutrality really help in this situation of providing accessibility, and how do you think you can bridge the divide where there are certain aspects of the community that gets marginalized in this fourth industrial revolution?
Sure, thanks, Rashi. I'll take with the first question, following up on the digital literacy point. One thing I would add in terms of, in addition to thinking about digital literacy as a sustained thing, not just a one-off course or interaction, we've also seen the most success with digital literacy efforts that are community-driven, that are developed by and for the community, or co-created with community partners. And that helps both foster a sense of engagement and ownership of that process, but also builds trust with community members. We often see less successful models that involve the private sector, particularly the internet service providers, who the populations that are not yet online are unlikely to trust, either because they've had negative interactions with service being cut off or with bill paying in the past, or they just haven't yet found a level of comfort and safety in getting online. And so developing that digital literacy shared learning at the community level helps foster that trust among members of the community who are already there. Now that's hard, right? We need partners, we need community organizations in those communities to help support and sustain those programs and those efforts. And we need investment at the federal level and state level in those programs to make, and by the philanthropic sector, to make sure that those programs are durable and adaptive. But I think digital literacy is a critical component as we think about this continuum of availability and access, adoption and affordability, and then use and engagement. This relates to the question of net neutrality too. So for us, sometimes I think people think that net neutrality is not a question that is directly linked to digital equity, but we really believe that it is, that your access to the internet should be unencumbered by the internet service provider who is provisioning the service, and that you as the internet user should be able to navigate anywhere you want to go on the internet without fear of being blocked or having certain content prioritized behind the scenes over others. And so the Open Technology Institute has been a staunch advocate for strong net neutrality protections. And we're really hopeful that in this new administration in the United States and the a new FCC with a shift in leadership, that we will see movement back towards the strong net neutrality rules that were implemented in the United States in 2015. But there's a broader question here, and with apologies for going a little bit into the US politics and policies, but the same mechanism that made net neutrality possible from a practical standpoint and a legal standpoint was treating the internet as a utility, saying we need to deliver it, and oversee it in a way that allows the federal government to intervene directly where there are consumer harms, to put in place rules like net neutrality protection. So there's this whole question of authority and what parts of the government are empowered to provide oversight and protect consumers or protect internet users in that context. And what we saw, just for a bit of background, when the Federal Communications Commission in the United States adopted the net neutrality rules in 2015, they put the internet and the provision of internet service on that strong legal footing. They said, the FCC is empowered in this context. They do have authority over internet service providers and can step in when internet users are being harmed. That was true for net neutrality, but that also opened up the authority for the FCC to much more clearly intervene on issues of affordability, access more generally, and when consumers were, or when internet users were not getting the service that they paid for, that they had recourse. They had someone, an expert agency in the government that they could go to and say, we need a better solution. All of that authority was undone under the most recent federal communications leadership, with the former chairman of the FCC essentially saying, abdicating all authority over the internet and leaving internet service in this unregulated bubble, which, as we've seen in the context of the pandemic, has meant that the federal government in the United States has been ill-equipped to fully step in and ensure that the communities who need connectivity most have it. And so I think, tying that all together, I think we need an empowered expert agency to intervene, to be able to intervene and oversee this market and this industry in a way that puts internet users front and center in the conversation.
No, actually, that makes a lot of sense. But moving over to Faraz, what we have realized is that with great power comes great responsibility, and we really can't leave each of them or leave the community at their own devices. So what given them access, and you've given them affordable access. Now, how do you help them adopt? What are your digital adoption strategies that you have carried out to make sure that the process is inclusive, and it's also making sure that they are online for a consistent period of time, for their workforce or for someone who's studying, and how does it empower someone on an individual level?
Great. So before I answer that question, Rashi, if you'd allow me, I just have a little comment to add to Sarah's comment over here. Actually, it's more a question. There is an element of policy and governance. You spoke about them in two different layers. So I'd love to understand that a little more, where government's job is to create the policy and the framework through which a regulator will implement anything that the private sector and public are doing. Is that what you're proposing?
So there are some nuances, I suppose, in the way that federal agencies operate in the United States. So there is an enabling statute that is passed by Congress, which gives federal agencies the authority to, in the case of the Federal Communications Commission, promulgate rules, create rules of the road for how a specific sector is overseen. We've seen this in phone regulation, where there are guardrails to ensure that, and subsidy programs that were predicated on the notion that everyone should have universal access to the phone network as it was being built out. We have rules that govern broadcasters and mobile providers, and so this becomes a question of, a legal question of what the FCC has been granted the authority to oversee, and courts in the United States have upheld that it is proper for the FCC to oversee the internet service provider market. And to be clear, in this instance, I'm talking about internet service providers as a conduit of the internet access, so not the internet, the content on the internet or the internet itself. So the provisioning of service to internet users. And we had that regulatory framework in place from approximately February of 2015 to December of 2017, I believe. Things were successful, nothing broke, the markets didn't fail. It was a system, though, of regulatory oversight and intervention where obvious user harms were occurring. So that's the sort of thing I'm proposing, not a fully government-run internet by any means, or even heavy-handed regulation of the markets itself, but rather targeted oversight with protection of internet users at the center of those regulatory interventions.
Thank you. I think the internet will now be termed as a basic need if it hasn't already been done. So if policies and regulatory frameworks are designed with that in mind, I think everything will hopefully fall in order. Rashi, to your question. So again, the dream that I bring is all about a specific kind of people, right? But the journey of making them aware of the potential of being connected to an entire world outside their, mountain, village located in the mountains is so exciting. I think opportunities for upskilling and reskilling will come from there once they define, the kind of jobs or things that people are interested in. And of course, all of the great things that Amrita said, the inequalities that come with this access will show up, but it's a learning curve. I think we need to make this connection available to people, and then fight the good fight to make sure that everything is equitable in that. And this, as a citizen, I can do, but as private sector, I don't think it falls entirely under my scope. But this citizen happens to be part of the private sector, so I bring both my personas to that good fight. I do think it is important to mention that skilling and upskilling and reskilling is going to be very important in continuing to create value, and that's not only true for the unconnected, it is also true for the connected. So there's the entire world is going to get their reference points are going to be redefined.
Oh, that's
So,
is
with
an
that.
important. And also, it also might contribute towards the digital economy, where you have a lot of people from the rural areas who actually migrate to urban settings for promise of a new future. But I think this pandemic has made us realize that we can actually work from anywhere, and we can I hopefully see a huge rise in remote work and normalizing remote work, especially in our Desi culture, where you have to have a little more trust. But great points there. And I'm going to now move on to the audience questions. We have 4 questions so far, but please feel free to send them in. I'm going to move on. There's a question for Amrita, which says, the Reliance Network's game-changing move years back brought prices tremendously down.
Actually, I did revert to it on the chat. Do you want me to speak about it again? Because the questions which came, I have reverted on the chat.
Okay, you have? Okay, so and have you also reverted to how do we make digitization more inclusive? And who wants to pick on that?
I did mention that too. So I did revert to Sikandar on it. I think policies, when they're drafted, need to be more nuanced. For example, the people whom you want to connect should be there in the table. For example, if you want to connect women in rural areas or even young people, you have to have them in the table. What kind of internet do they want? What is it you are looking at? So it's important to make it inclusive. If you want to connect people from the minorities or even rural populations, you have to have them so that you know what their wants are, what their demands are, how they want to use it. Based on it, I think if decision makers have to make policies, or it would be more nuanced. So one of the things is to have every stakeholder on the table when policies are being devised. That would make it a bit more inclusive.
But Amrita, we also see, in the absence of robust policies, what do you think that they are the most pressing issues in digital governance? We just saw the recent IT law with with amendments? And how do you think the pressing issues in digital government can be tackled, especially in terms of when you have informal communities that get into community networks or municipal networks, or as Sarah said, mesh networks? And we do have an example in Karnataka that's run by an IIT Bombay professor called Sabani. So maybe you could highlight a little bit about what are the issues that you've seen in digital governments.
So when the concern at times is government has very good intent when policies are being made. However, many a times the policies do not take the rights of people into consideration. For example, certain rules, regulations are made wherein they are made with good intent, but they may be stifling to many communities. They may be, the after effects of it may be, when you're connecting people as, you need innovative ways in connecting the community network by IIT Bombay, or even some which internet society has been funding, are great ways in which communities can be empowered to have the connectivity and to sustain it, which it is good. But then you have various ways in which you can do it. There are places where you may have to use a satellite. There may be places where community networks work, or even the CSCs or the community Wi-Fi, which the government is planning, if it is done in a particular way, would help. But again, when policies are being made, they are made with good intent, but I think there should be more communities involved so that the voices can be heard and all issues can be taken into consideration. And that is something which is concerning at times, because we have a lot of regulations which are coming up. They are good, but certain things are missing at some point of time, and that's where our concerns, especially the rights of people. How you can protect the individuals, what would be the government oversight when such rules come in, what would be the liability of the platforms or the others. So those are certain things, the cybersecurity part, the privacy part, those are important. For example, India still doesn't have a privacy law, though it is in the making. But without that, how would with so many people coming online, generating so much of data, how can you protect their legitimate interests and rights, which they may not be aware of? So those are certain questions, I think, which are very pertinent at this time.
I'm going to now move on to an audience question, which says, hey, I'd find it really helpful if people could share how digital inclusion and exclusion affects mental health and emotional well-being. I can see it's difficult for people, but is there any research or data that provides some specifics as to someone's talking about the overuse of the internet over here? And is there anyone from the panelists who wants to take that?
I did respond to it in the chat. As in, there is no, I have not come across data, there may be, of how exclusion affects mental health. However, there are researches being done on how internet addiction can help, affect mental health. But personally, I do feel that someone who is online and is not being able to access internet does feel excluded, does feel stressed. I'm sure that people who are accessing the internet and those who have not accessed internet may feel inadequacy of not being able to access the things which someone is. But I have not come across any such research. Perhaps we have still not reached a position where we have everyone connected, or for us to get everyone connected in at least a developing country or emerging country like India is a priority first.
No, that's true. I'm not sure if we have time to wrap up for it, but from what I understand is that we've kind of come to a consensus that we need to be mindful about the different needs and look at solving the issue, the infrastructural issue, which is a technical issue, from a humanistic lens. And we also need to look at the fact that the current policies don't necessarily account for the social and cultural context, and you need to include the communities, especially people with disability or women, right from the technical process to the policy process. And also with access also comes a lot of digital skills, where we need to understand what are the ways and measures that we can keep ourselves safe, right? For example, there's so much reliance on encryption for digital payments, e-commerce. What are the different password management systems that are there? How do we get rid of issues like cyber stalking, cyber theft, online harassment, and gender-based violence. So these are pressing issues which, if we build our digital competencies, would be served. We have over a minute, and maybe if we have any last comments or final thoughts, and then I'd go on with the vote of thanks. Anyone?
I just remind that we have to also, while designing this, there's a remote population in all countries. And let's not exclude them from the table. As Amrita said, let's have them represented also, because they have certain priorities for connectivity, and it should always be represented on the table. So
go ahead, Amrita.
Yeah, thanks. I think it is, if we want to enable internet for everyone in the same equitable manner, we need to have everyone working together. No single person can do it, and internet has to be on. I would say, I missed this point. We have had a lot of shutdowns, but it actually doesn't help. There may be different solutions for it. Internet has to be available for everyone, just like electricity is. It is an essential service today, so it should be available, affordable, and accessible for everyone.
Thanks, Amrita.
And I would just emphasize the affordability point. I think particularly in our experience in the United States, that this is really the dividing line between folks who are able to connect and those who are not. And we haven't done enough yet in this country to from a policy standpoint, to really bridge that gap. And there's good steps happening. An emergency broadband benefit was passed into law last December that will give qualifying households a $50 a month subsidy, which will go a long way during this pandemic to get folks connected. But that's not we need a long-term solution as well. And so that will be the continued focus of our work in the coming months and years.
No, this, actually, unfortunately, this brings us to the end of the hour. I'd like to thank all the panelists for such a lovely conversation. And this obviously wouldn't have happened without the partnership that we have with Future Tense in New America. Thank you so much for hosting the event. Also, a final reminder that we'd love for you to take the Davos Lab survey if you want your suggestions to be incorporated, because we would be sharing the report at the annual meeting happening this August, hopefully in person in Singapore. And yeah, thank you all. I'd also like to thank our supporting partners, DCN Network, which is an international network of experts who work on digital communication issues and policies across Africa, Asia, and Europe. I'd also like to thank Network Capital. And with that, we come to an end, my friends. Thank you so much. And you should also be sure to RSVP for next week's Future Tense event on how will we learn in the future. Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure moderating this session.